Antimage and Isekai Lithup Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 26, A Mage's Insight. Dad, you're being really rude. I told you Nathan's all good. You're not just insulting him, you're insulting my judgment of character. Stella's yell interrupted the man-to-man moment, and Dallo shrugged apologetically. The gesture seemed to say, I'm sorry, but I had to check. He gestured Nathan forward with a slight bow of his head. Nathan entered the ring, feeling sheepish. Stella looked annoyed, and Cullo was giving her husband a knowing and not entirely pleased look. Then she turned to Nathan and said, We know how to teach magic, but that's not what you need, is it? Stella says you want to experience more spells and mana types, but how? If you don't have a way to manipulate mana, how can we demonstrate spells? Nathan looked around the room, then shrugged and walked to its center, before sitting on the stone ground and removing his shirt. He looked up at Dallo and Cullo. Yes, that's about right. The way I learn about spells is by absorbing them. It takes a while before I get good at it, so please go easy on me at the start. I've got the most experience with fire and force magic because of practicing with Stella, but I've got some experience with earth and shadow. And I guess mental magic from Giant's Rest and necromancy from the Grave Tangle. Cullo rubbed her hands together. We call the kind of mana that was in the Grave Tangle death mana. And most mental spells just require basic mana, though they are complex spells. But it appears somebody is volunteering to be a target dummy. Dear, I think you're best suited to starting out. Dallo shrugged, then zapped Nathan with a small lightning bolt. It happened instantaneously. One moment he was fine, the next there was a crack and his muscles gave a brief spasm. Nathan looked up to see Dallo inspecting him curiously. Can you do that again? A few times, please, with at least 5 seconds in between. Dallo's face split into a wider grin. Indeed I can. Then he zapped Nathan again. And again. Now that Nathan was expecting it, he focused his mind on the feeling of the magic. It was clearly a type of mana he hadn't experienced before. The mana felt like the buildup and release of a static shock, and carried a faint vibration like the hum of a high-voltage power line. Once he had a grasp of it, Nathan focused on the spell, picking it apart as the fourth bolt struck him. It was simply a packet of insulated charge sent across the air and into him. He didn't understand how it was isolated and directed, but the source of danger was obvious enough. I swear he's just sending free high-energy electrons at me using some kind of containment. But they're magical somehow. Where do they come from? Honestly, it's like asking where the conjured earth behind those earth balls came from. Magic. Dallo pointed to cast the next bolt, and Nathan focused on controlling and guiding the magical charge around the surface of his skin, where it quickly dissipated. He'd meant to ground it into the floor, but just guiding it around him had been sufficient for the charge to be absorbed. Nathan felt his magic resistance flex, the otherworldly sense the talent gave him sending a faint tingle through him. It was an intuitive feeling, but Nathan suppressed it all the same. I think the talent wants to develop. Not yet, I can still learn more, expose myself to more magic. I'll hold on to the thought that triggered it for later. Absorption. Absorption is the key. Meanwhile, Dallo looked at him, utterly perplexed. How did you do that? Stella responded, pointing directly at Nathan. It's amazing, Dad. That's exactly what I wanted to show you. He's gotten really good at getting rid of fireballs. Here. She tossed a fireball at Nathan. Nathan rolled his eyes. Stella had been trying to surprise him during practice recently, wanting to test how well he could resist her magic without warning. It had been useful practice, and at this point it required next to no attention to deconstruct the fireball and absorb it into him. Dallo had been slightly alarmed at Stella's casual fireball, but controlled himself as Nathan took apart the spell. Then he raised his hand once more. Very interesting. Nathan, are you good to continue? You appear unhurt, but I would be sure. Nathan nodded up at him, a feeling of excitement building in his chest. He had this insight on lock. I'm just peachy, Please move on to other mana types as quickly as you can. Dalo raised an eyebrow at Nathan's strange choice of words, but proceeded nonetheless. Let us proceed through the basic elements then. I skipped ahead with lightning, and you have already experienced earth and fire, but we will move on to air, cold, and water now. He raised a hand and a jet of wind assailed Nathan. The spell was narrow and controlled, more like being the target of an air hose than a gust of wind. It was continuous, and though the force threatened to push Nathan backwards, he resisted and picked apart the feeling of the mana. Despite the speed, the mana felt slow. Like it was always in motion but never in a hurry to go anywhere. The spell itself was more complicated than the last, with some sort of spiraling pattern and a construct at the end to deliver the force effectively. Nathan bent that force construct, causing the wind to jet to the sides and destabilize the spell. It sent out a puff of air in every direction as it broke. Dalo frowned again, shaking his hand slightly. Fascinating. Every spell reacts differently. Now, for cold. He gestured, and the temperature around Nathan dropped. The spell chilled the air around him and tried to dig into his flesh. It slid off with no concentration on Nathan's part. The mana was absolutely still, conveying the impression of complete stasis. Nathan shook himself, and the spell shattered as he imparted motion onto the mana around him. The elderly mage didn't bother speaking, just stared intently at Nathan as he gestured again. An orb of water appeared around Nathan's head. He hadn't anticipated it, but he had been expecting something weird, so he didn't panic, merely holding his breath. The spell only affected his head and followed with his movements. The water was formed of mana, and its constant motion reminded Nathan of the air mana, but slower. It damped his movement, suppressing and absorbing any energy released into it. The spell itself was surprisingly complicated, locking the mana to his head. He poked it with a finger and the water mana flowed around his hand, resisting the attempt to flick it away. Instead of trying to push the mana away, Nathan pulled on it, absorbing the mana into his pores, then into the bloodstream. His talent flexed again, and it was all Nathan could do to keep it steady. He opened his eyes and took a deep breath. Low-tier spell sense rank 8 achieved. Mid-tier focused mind rank 7 achieved. Cullel spoke up next, raising a hand to interrupt her husband. My turn, you nearly drowned him. And since Stella has shown him some force spells, let's go with this. She made no gestures, but Nathan was suddenly encompassed by absolute blackness. It reminded him of his trip through Tial's portal. The sudden shift was disorienting, and Nathan felt his ears pop, but it wasn't the eye-sucking vacuum of before. Nathan closed his eyes and reached out with his talent. There was mana there, but it was more abstract. It was defined by an absence, like everything that made up the world had stopped existing. Nathan identified it as a new type of mana and felt the weave of the spell. The mana felt like an absence, like it was the opposite of material reality. The spell was pushing things away from Nathan, with multiple layers of different spell patterns. Nathan guessed they were each pushing away a different aspect of the world. Not perfectly, as demonstrated by the thin layer of air around him. But all Nathan had to do was break the weave, which had already started to dissolve on contact. He sped up the process, using his talent to grab the nothingness and pull it into him. The spell vanished with a faint pop. Stella applauded, and Dalo stroked his beard again, looking pleased as he spoke. See, it's not just elemental resistance. Void broke just like the others. Okay, so that was void mana. Makes sense. Cullel looked mildly frustrated. The foxwoman gestured for the first time, and Nathan's weight lightened until he began to float. Gravity. Seriously. Low-tier identify rank 5 achieved. Nathan turned his attention to the magic, trying to ignore an immediate flash of nausea. The spell was both simple and complicated, woven of bands that felt of weight. There was no other way to describe it. The connections of the spell were also uniquely dense. They resisted Nathan's effort to break them, staying firmly anchored to one another as he pitted his will against the spell. His concentration was disturbed by his head bumping into the ceiling. Below him, Stella chuckled and Dalo shushed her. This isn't working. How to break gravity? You don't. How to escape a spell that uses it? That's a better question. He was the target of the spell that was tracking him, and only him, since there wasn't a cyclical air current in the room. As he looked again, he noticed another element to the spell. Thin wires bound the dense structure to Nathan, which he found he could more easily manipulate. They resisted for a moment and then snapped, sending him falling to the ground. Low-tier spell sense rank 9 achieved. Nathan landed on his feet, bending his knees and rolling to absorb the rather long fall. Nathan brushed a speck of imaginary dirt from his shoulder and turned towards Cullal. Gravity mana is weird. Got any more? In response, beams of white light shot from Cullal's eyes and hit Nathan in the shoulder, tracing down his arm. They left a light burn behind, and Nathan focused on the feeling. If that's a laser, it shouldn't be visible unless it's strong enough to ionize the air. And in that case, it should sound like a lightning bolt. You know, the way that this magic seems to follow some natural laws and not others is really throwing me. But it's magic. The entire point is that it doesn't follow natural laws. The light mana was like a scorching hot wire vibrating against his skin at high speed. For all that, the spell was fairly simple. Just lots of high-energy light mana absorbing into his skin to cause painful burns. And it would probably blind me if it was hitting me in the eyes. Spurred on by his earlier insight, Nathan thought about absorbing the light without it damaging him. He didn't recall how silicon solar panels worked, but he knew photosynthesis, and he'd read a paper about how fungi could use melanin to absorb ionizing radiation. The trick was absorbing the energy as something other than heat. What other energy was there for him? Stamina was the obvious answer, and that thought resonated. His talent flexed again, and this time Nathan didn't stop it. Distracted, he spoke to the mages around him. Please cast a variety of spells at me, right now. He closed his eyes and centered his attention on absorbing the light mana, using it to fuel his stamina. As more spells impacted him, Nathan broadened the absorption effect. He could manipulate and resist all of these mana types. If he could absorb light mana, he could absorb all of them. A blue box shoved its way into his vision. Congratulations, you have developed the high-tier magic resistance talent into magic absorption. It starts at rank 1 and becomes more effective as it ranks up. Think about how you use your talent's functions to aid in talent development at rank 10. Beware, it is harder to rank and develop non-tiered talents. Permanent talent, magic absorption. You have developed high-tier magic resistance talent into a permanent pillar of your being. You are heavily resistant to all forms of magic and can directly absorb the mana of spells cast on you into stamina. You are forever unable to cast spells or access magic. Magical items cannot affect you and will degrade at your touch. Mid-tier focused mind rank 8 achieved. A voice penetrated into his trance. What is happening? Stop casting. The volley of spells quickly ended. Nathan opened his eyes to the two older mages staring at him in befuddlement. Stella just looked excited. As soon as she saw him open his eyes, she jumped forward, bouncing from one foot to another. Did you develop the talent? Spells started doing even less and all the mana got sucked into you. What does it do? Nathan felt his face blossom into a manic grin. This new talent was incredible. He'd never used magic or magic items, but he'd already reconciled himself to that. And now he could use spells to recharge his stamina. He raised both his arms in triumph. Yes, now I absorb the mana of spells cast on me to replenish my stamina. Nathan threw back his head and laughed. Stella was just as excited as him. All that I hear is that when my ally is wounded and surrounded by enemies, it's absolutely correct to hit him with a fireball. They were interrupted by Dalo walking past them, holding out his hands. "I need a drink." 2 tumblers full of pink liquid flew toward him, and he handed one to Cullel. "Cheers. I think we've just witnessed the birth of a new school of anti-mage combat. Not entirely sure I'm pleased with this development." Meanwhile, Stella went to hug Nathan, but he held his arms out to decline. Not only was he still shirtless, but he was worried for her heavily enchanted robe. She looked upset, so he explained. "My talent says magical items cannot affect you and will degrade at your touch." "Oh," she took a step back. Cullel choked in surprise on her drink before elbowing Dalo. "Immune to magic, but he can't use magical items. That talent has some serious downsides. Bright fruit isn't his only meal." Dalo's expression brightened, but he still seemed somewhat bitter about Nathan's skill. "I bet he can use that to break curses. Do we still have that cursed wand from the Kali's Conclave Teleportarium?" Cullel frowned at her husband, pointing a finger at his forehead. "No, that's a soul curse and we're not experimenting with it. It's unreasonable and you know it. Maybe once he's higher level and understands the talent better. Not before then. Now come, I believe we have some more time to practice." Dalo grumbled, but accepted his wife's rejoinder with only a little additional glaring on her part. They spent the next couple of hours practicing with Nathan's talent, and he was glad to have powerful mages on hand who could help him figure it out. His development had made Nathan even more magic-resistant than he'd been before, though powerful spells that Nathan wasn't good at converting could still injure him. Low-tier spell sense rank 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to the next level. It took some time to determine what the variables on the conversion efficiency of the talent were, and they finally cracked it once Nathan stopped the mages from randomly casting spells on him, making them test one hypothesis at a time. If Nathan understood the structure of the spells and purposefully disrupted them like he had earlier in the day, that made absorption better. He was more efficient at gaining stamina from single-target spells that directly affected him and nothing else. Mana type also made a difference. He was pretty good with light, fire, cold, electricity, and water, only middling with gravity, earth, and air, and pretty bad with void, force, and surprisingly enough, basic mana. The stamina he replenished was dependent on the amount of mana spent on the spell. Nathan couldn't generate tons of stamina from a low-powered spell. But it seemed he could hit the max efficiency if he fulfilled 2 out of 3 criteria. If he understood the spell, if it was single target, or if the mana types were in his favor. Awesome. Artha said I needed a way to replenish stamina, and it's hard for me to think of a better way than absorbing magic. Especially when my enemies specialize in magic and I've got a prodigy mage on my team. Chapter 27. A mage's feast. They emerged from the basement into an absolute cacophony of noise coming from the back of the house. Nathan looked questioningly at Stella, who shrugged. "It's probably just Kanta's cooking. She gets a little intense. You want to see? Come on." Nathan followed Stella, curious as to how one person could be making that much noise. It sounded like a construction site, not someone cooking. They poked their heads around the corner into the kitchen, and Nathan was amazed. Kanta's was a thick-set woman with pale skin and a shaved head. She was missing an ear, her arms were heavily muscled, and she was using clearly enchanted tools. Behind her, a set of knives were busy chopping vegetables. A pot stirred itself over a magical fire, the spoon banging against the sides. Kanta's herself was busy dissecting an animal larger than Nathan with an enormous cleaver. He couldn't tell what it was, given that it was already in 6 pieces. As he watched, she removed a rib roast from an oven, plopping it into an enormous bowl full of smoking, dark liquid. It was starting to smell good. There was a spiced fragrance reminiscent of tikka masala and another like smoke and pepper. Judging from the piles of food being processed, this was not going to be a small gathering. Nathan looked to Stella and asked, How many people are coming today? Stella shrugged. It changes. It's usually Stanel and the Guardians of Gemor. Usually Arl, Sarah and Kachai come along. Sometimes some other adventurers get invited and occasionally various guildmasters. My mom banned too many of the council from coming at once or else it becomes a work meeting. She led him away from the kitchen, and they rejoined her parents, who were cuddling on a couch in the foyer. It had a nice view overlooking the entrance. He and Stella took up other seats, settling into overstuffed armchairs that were scattered around. Nathan was tempted to speak up and ask more questions, but Dallo and Cullel seemed content to sit in silence, and Stella had pulled out some sort of scroll and started reading. So Nathan just sat quietly, thinking about his afternoon in more detail. His new talent changed everything. Magic absorption was better at protecting Nathan from magic than magic resistance had been, and it restored his stamina at the same time. It filled the hole in his build that Artha had pointed out and would make him a peerless anti-mage. Even Dallo had acknowledged that, though he still seemed off-put by the very idea of Nathan's talent existing. He had all but asked Nathan to not teach it to anybody. Nathan took a deep breath, trying not to run away with his excitement. Against normal soldiers and monsters that didn't use magic, the talent would be useless. Well, not entirely. Stella had already caught on to the fact that she could recharge his stamina by blowing him up. It would even hit any nearby enemies as well. Nathan was a bit worried about what that meant for his clothing costs. Maybe if he got the unarmored defensive skill, he could go into battle with less clothing. Nathan snorted at the idea. He'd heard of the Celts running into battle as bear, but had never imagined that he'd consider it. I'll go on a quest for indestructible boxers if I need to. I'm sure one of these random doom tombs has a pair lying around somewhere. Returning to the thought of Stella replenishing his stamina, he'd noticed that both she and her parents could cast seemingly without end. Mages were supposed to have mana as a class resource, scaling with their level and recharging slowly, but constantly. It was likely they had some powerful talent or skill that either dramatically enlarged their mana pools or gave them ridiculous regen. Hey Stella, just asking, but it seems like you have really high mana regen. I don't need to know how, but as long as you're around it doesn't seem like I need to worry too much about stamina regeneration. Is that right? Dallo looked over with a frown. Observant little Mitroch, aren't you? We did go all the way up the mountain just now, so it's not a surprise. Don't mention it to anybody. Cullel rolled her eyes and licked Dallo's ear, eliciting a squawk. Don't be a white, they're on a team together. They should know each other's strengths and weaknesses. She paused to nestle against him. I know you want to stick your sword in, but don't be a nuisance. Our daughter seems to have given her trust. Dallo harumphed. We'll see what Kia says. I just want to make sure they don't make any youthful mistakes, and the mysterious stranger from far away is still not a story I trust. Stella looked chagrined at her parents' interplay, shooting Nathan an apologetic look and fingering her braid. I appreciate Stella being apologetic about this. I'm getting annoyed at all the gatekeeping, and feeling like she's on my side makes me a lot less upset about it. Still frustrating for Dallo to act this way when I feel like I've proved myself multiple times. Before his flash of anger could push him toward anything unwise, Nathan stilled his mind, counting out a few deep breaths. He tried to look at the situation from Dallo's perspective. A strange man had joined his daughter's adventuring team. A man without any verifiable past and abilities that seemed tailor-made to pose a threat. Dallo knew that there were people who would attack Stella, and was paranoid from a life of adventuring. In that light, it made a lot more sense. He'd convinced the heirs he deserved to be among them with his powerful talents and some amount of braggadocio. Now he needed to convince their parents he'd help keep their children safe, and wasn't going to unnecessarily endanger them through betrayal or any suicidal plans to attack Giant's Rest. It soon became clear they were seated in the front room, so Cullo could magically open the gate every time a guest arrived. The guests trickled into the foyer, sitting and chatting. Nathan was drawn into conversation a few times, but he was keeping a close eye on the door to make sure he noticed everybody who arrived. The first was Lescabola, the stylish, dark-skinned archer of the Guardians. He was once again dressed in tight leather pants, but this time wore a sharply cut purple vest that left his well-muscled chest bare. He had brought his enormous bow, but left it and a small quiver propped on a stand next to the door. He hugged Cullo before giving Dallo an elaborate handshake. Kia was next, with Kacha in tow. They were both dressed in shining armor, which brought out a certain family resemblance that wasn't otherwise shared between the muscular red-haired woman and the young wolfman. Kia wasn't dressed in full plate like Kacha, merely a breastplate, vambraces and greaves of shining metal. Seeing Kia next to Kacha, it was clear that she had a qualitative advantage in shininess. Do they have a skill for that? Might be part of the whole paladin thing. They also left their weapons at the door, Kia's oversized greatsword resting on a rack clearly meant for it. She was still armed with a dagger and short sword, while Kacha had a small mace strapped to his shin. Keeping weapons at hand was just an obsession with these people. Though that might just be Kia, she struck Nathan as a constant vigilance sort of person. Arl and Sarah came through the door next, accompanied by a man who had to be Stanel Crusens. He shared their copper-skinned good looks, with a sharply trimmed black beard and a similar pouch on his belt as his children, probably likewise containing a whole armory's worth of weapons. He was corded with muscles and covered in scars, most old enough to be faint lines. Zarian Dalna arrived last, the diminutive orange-skinned woman dressed in a classic little black dress that clung to her curves just as her adventuring leathers had. And they were some curves. She wasn't carrying weapons besides a small purse, but Nathan remembered how she'd turned pebbles into fortifications and projectiles worthy of siege warfare. The Guardians made small talk for a little longer before Zarian drew Nathan into the center of attention. "I recall your face, Nathan Lark. I'm a bit surprised to see you again, given that the last time you were part of a refugee convoy from a Giant's Rest raid. Village folk don't often join the adventurers, and are even more rarely placed in such company as the heirs." Kia responded, twirling a goblet in her hands as her eyes tracked Nathan like a pair of battleship guns. "But he's not from the villages, is he? My greetings, Nathan Lark. Kacha says good things about you. When I spoke with Vihala, she said you'd escaped from an Archmage research tower and defeated 3 slaver mages in ambush. She did say that you had a fire in your core and rare advantages that few may claim. May I ask you for your story?" Nathan noticed that the other conversations had trailed off, and everybody was listening. About half of them had heard this story before, and Sarah gave Nathan a subtle, encouraging gesture. Nathan took a moment to calmly meet Kia's eyes. She was one of the most intimidating people he'd ever met, tied with that one Nobel laureate whose lab Nathan had interviewed for. But he'd give her calm certainty and earnestly stick to the story he'd decided on. It had to be the 4th time he'd explained this, but he supposed it made sense for people to keep asking. "I was abducted from my home by Tldho Droxile, a Giant's Rest Archmage working on dimensional research. He yanked me through a portal from my home into his tower. It didn't take me long to learn that he's the kind of person who will have what he desires, regardless of what those around him want. So I escaped. It wasn't a simple process, and I gained a powerful anti-magic talent along the way. I later developed a self-healing talent to heal the injuries sustained on the run." Kia didn't seem surprised by any of that. She broke eye contact to look down at her goblet. This was something Vihala said too. "You won conflict with an Archmage, with yourself being under level 27. I will not ask for your class, but it must be worthy of a lick." She seemed skeptical but not disbelieving. Cards on the table. I have the feeling that evasion would not serve me well with a paladin. Nathan smiled at her skepticism. I wouldn't say I won that conflict. He removed my arm with a disintegrate. I broke his nose. I wasn't even level 9 at that point, and I picked my class while fleeing from his golems after he teleported out. It was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, and the only thing I cared about was escaping the clutches of the man who sought to own me. Low-tier earnestness rank 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to the next level. Kia's frown deepened and she shook her head. I cannot tell if you speak the truth, and it concerns me. Somebody of your age under level 9. For this story to run true, your home must indeed be a strange place, and your anti-magic talent must exceed any I've ever heard of. She looked to Dalo. Dalo, have you tested it? Dalo ran a hand through his beard. It is potent. I can see how it would allow somebody to surprise an unprepared archmage, even without a class to back it up. They really do depend on magic for everything, and Nathan's talent is powerful against all magic. Given its nature, I would expect it to be extraordinarily effective against mental magic in particular. I don't believe that the Archmages of Giant's Rest would encourage the development of such an insight. It would be far too easily turned against them. Oh, was that what they were concerned about? I guess it makes sense. I escaped from a Giant's Rest research tower with a new talent none of them had ever seen before. Kia gave a short then asked a simple question which seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Does he have the spark? Dalo nodded, looking to his wife with a sigh. Yes, I do think he does. Nathan shot an inquisitive glance to Stella and Kachai. Kachai wasn't looking his way, but Stella shrugged in response. She didn't know what they were talking about or couldn't explain. Kullo clapped her hands together and changed the subject. Well, I do believe we've kept Kantas waiting long enough. Up and down, my friends, let us enjoy our meals. Most of the group collected their drinks and got up, though the dark-skinned archer Leska clapped Nathan on the shoulder. I'm pleased to see you again, friend. It's rare enough we adventurers get to save people, and rarer still to spend time with those we save. I'm hoping that you'll be with the heirs till the end, or at least until they earn a different name. With that, they went to eat, drink, and talk. Kantas appeared to have left after depositing serving plates on the table, but the food was amazing. It was very different from anything Nathan had ever had before, but that just added to the thrill. Is this thick, curry-like dish going to be sweet, savory, or spicy? Nathan didn't know until he tried it. Nobody breathed fire from the heat, though a few dishes pushed the edge of Nathan's tolerance. Regeneration didn't make him immune to lighting his taste buds on fire. There was small talk around the table, but it either referenced the excellent food or dealt with adventure politics that Nathan didn't have the context for. There seemed to be some controversy over assignments on the last delve day, certain teams claiming they hadn't even gotten through the doors of their targets before the day was called off due to the grave tangle. These traditionalists were calling for extra favors due to the inconvenience. After the meal had been demolished, Kullo used a spell to stack the plates and sent them into a wash basin, where Dalo summoned a small whirlpool. Then, several fluted bottles of colored liquid flew out of a cabinet, accompanied by small glasses. Ah, this kind of convenience is why we do this here. No need to serve yourself when the magic can do it all for you. Stainel stretched back in his chair, reaching for the glass floating toward him. It evaded his hand and bonked him on the forehead before landing on the table. He glared at Kullo, but she looked like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Stainel broke off, clearly giving up that battle as unwinnable. He turned to address the heirs, who were all seated at one end of the table. Anyway, something else we wanted to tell you all. You're going on your blooding patrol in 2 days. We've arranged for it to be the first of your class. Won't be too bad, just out north a little ways and back. dice a few stalkers, maybe even pick up some levels. There was a moment of silence while the older adventurers waited for a reaction. Sarah provided it. Isn't the north the most dangerous part of the near ruins? More people go missing there than in any other part of Old Gemor. Kia answered, pouring a drink of a dark purple liquid. Yes, but for you, nothing else is suitable. The Blooding Patrol is an old tradition about the first mission a new team takes. Observing that tradition properly while integrating it with the new training course will quiet some grumbling about Sudriel's changes. So, the near north sector without support. There was another moment of silence which Zarian promptly broke. Weapons up, friends, you're ready for this. Don't get in your own way and things will be fine. I remember our Blooding Patrol well. A couple of Earth Stalkers and a lost siege boar. It wasn't anything to worry over even back then. Easy levels. Kachai spoke up, argumentative. But Nathan doesn't even have a weapon. He's good with his fists, but that won't do much against an Earth Stalker, much less a siege boar. Stanel shrugged, drinking from his own cup of glowing amber liquid. Easy enough to solve. What's your preference, Nathan? Any talent or skill benefits or restrictions? Nathan was pouring himself a drink of the purple liquor. He didn't know what it was, but it was purple and that was cool. He looked up at Stanel's question. I really haven't trained with any weapons, and none of my skills or talents have anything to do with weapons, except my anti-magic talent says I'll degrade magical items with a touch. Everybody around the table reacted with varying degrees of surprise. Kia merely raised one elegant eyebrow. Leska goggled a bit, his eyes going wide. Stanel merely looked thoughtful, then snapped his fingers. Here, I think this might serve nicely. His hand flickered, and all of a sudden a spear landed next to Nathan's seat with a thud. The butt of the spear had hit the floor, and the shaft was leaning against his chair, vibrating slightly with the force of the toss. Stanel continued as if he hadn't just thrown a weapon across the dinner table while holding a glass of alcohol. A spear's easy to use. You'll have the reach on most things, just keep the pointy end facing them. Maybe poke a little. That spear is enchanted for extreme sharpness and durability, but only the spearhead is enchanted. The haft's just made from Everoak. Don't touch the spearhead and it'll do well enough. Nathan tentatively touched the polished haft, looking up towards the spearhead. The shaft was made of a heavy wood, so dark red as to be nearly black. The spearhead was a broad triangle of polished, orange metal about the size of Nathan's hand, etched with tiny symbols. Nathan looked back at Stanel. Thank you very much. I appreciate this. Stanel waved a hand. I am glad to give to somebody who would stand with my children, wield it well. Now drink your umna. I only assume you picked it because you didn't know what it is. Kia, who also had a glass of the purple liquor, loudly slurped a mouthful. Don't listen to him. He hasn't had taste since he caught a fireball with his face. Nathan tried the purple drink umna. It was thick, almost syrupy. The taste was very fruity, but not overbearingly sweet and with a tang of acid. Nathan had always liked his drinks fruity, though it would probably be improved with ice. But ice in drinks didn't seem to be a thing here. He shrugged and drank his syrupy, purple drink as the conversation moved to other topics. Some hours of good conversation later, Nathan walked with the other heirs back to the adventurer complex. Kia was with them, and both she and Kachai seemed to have healed themselves from the drunkenness. They wouldn't share, and Nathan couldn't do the same with regeneration. He'd tried, and he wasn't drunk, just tipsy, rather tipsy. He was glad that Kia was with them, otherwise he'd feel paranoid about getting jumped as they staggered down the steep hill. Some water later they'd all gone to bed, resolved to train with new vigor in the morning to prepare for the Blooding Patrol. As Nathan sat and thought about the day before sleep, he was sure of one thing. The Blooding Patrol was a very ominous name. Chapter 28 Preparations for a patrol. The next 2 days passed even more quickly, the impending trial lending an air of determination to their exercises. Stella pushed harder during the morning run, and Nathan was once again rewarded for his intensive exercise. Low-tier sprinting rank 8 achieved. Nathan filled everybody in on the basics of magic absorption. It seemed necessary to explain why he wanted to get hit with fireballs now. They already knew he was resistant to magic, but he told them he now directly benefited from it. He received a round of disbelieving reactions. Sarah's response was wry and self-deprecating. Nathan's becoming the real monster eater, showing us how adventuring is really done. All we've got is our parents' treasure. Arl remained unfazed, a faint wry grin on his face. He still needs us for some things, like showing him how to hold a spear. Not like that. Arl proceeded to drill Nathan in combat exercises with his new spear. It really was a very simple weapon, and a basic thrusting motion was usually the best choice, and very effective. So long as Nathan kept the spear pointing the right direction, nobody could get close enough to hit him without having to do something fancy to get past the point. A few times Nathan was tempted to twirl it like a staff, but Arl chided him when he suggested it. If you had a short spear, that might be more effective. But your spear is about 8 feet long and not weighted for that. You've got a longer reach than anything we might face except a muck grabber, and if something gets in close, you're better off using your fists. I'd give you an axe instead, but your class seems focused on punching things. Arl snorted, shaking his head at the idea of a fighting class that didn't use weapons. The next day, Jalba introduced the blooding patrol to all of the trainees. Most were already familiar with it, but Jalba went over the plan in detail. Every other day, a different team would go out into the ruins, patrolling near the transit roads to keep the vital links between Gemor and the villages safe. Given the size of the ruins, it was one of the most common adventurer jobs in Gemor, with a carefully managed schedule ensuring that every section of the roads was patrolled every month or so. They didn't patrol the eastern road very often since it led to Giant's Rest. The people who went that way most often were adventurers, and they could handle themselves. Jalba then went through appropriate responses to different situations. If the team found a small threat, they dealt with it. If they found a larger threat, they were expected to determine its scope and retreat to Gemor so a specialized team could be sent to deal with it. Most of the common monsters were considered small threats, unless encountered in excessive quantities. The chatter around the classroom indicated it was considered shameful to retreat in the face of stalkers, lesser undead or similar monsters. Jalba tried to dispel that notion, slapping down the loudest voice. His name was Simla, the same black-skinned human man who'd been in a shouting match with Koch when Nathan was first introduced to the heirs. Jalba rode roughshod over his protests. Your priority is to come back alive and unmaimed. It's called the Blooding Patrol because it's the first time you spill monster blood, not an attempt to spill your own blood. We need these roads safe to keep Gemor connected to the villages that feed us. That means we need to have teams to do that. Those teams need to prioritize staying alive so they can keep doing their job. This isn't about glory seeking. It's about keeping you and your teammates alive so you can keep Gemor alive. Without notice, he wouldn't have caught Simla's muttered response. Retreat just means you aren't good enough. If Jalba heard it, he didn't respond and the lesson continued. Jalba laid out the schedule for when each team would go and approximately where they would patrol. Nobody besides the heirs were scheduled to patrol the northern ruins. Most of the patrols were located to the south and east, and the target areas were close to the city. The heirs' patrol stood out on the map like a sore thumb, located about a third of the way along the North Transit Road. The patrol itself was relatively simple, with no set route. You went to a landmark and then searched the ruins nearby. Most teams had some way of detecting monsters, be it magic, tracking, or perception skills, and they were expected to use them to investigate the area. The patrol was to take the entire day, leaving shortly after the sun started shining and returning before nightfall. That afternoon, they had their final practice before the patrol. They went through some group formations and worked on some last-minute techniques. Of particular interest was the new strategy of throw fireballs at Nathan. It was a lot more effective if the fireball landed close to Nathan instead of hitting him. If Stella squarely hit Nathan, he tended to absorb the entire spell. It led to some amusing blip sounds instead of the normal kaboom. But if Stella instead landed the fireball near to Nathan, he didn't get back quite as much stamina, but he didn't absorb the entire spell either. Nathan suggested they name the practice Danger Close, which he would yell when requesting a fireball, or Stella would yell if she was hucking one in his direction. It also helped Arl and Kachai know when to back up. Nathan practiced dodging to the perfect distance from the fireball, so he would absorb as much of the spell as possible without disrupting the portions of the blast aimed away from him. Low-tier dodging footwork 5 achieved. The night before their patrol was quiet, almost contemplative. They all returned from their tutoring before dinner, with Nathan still contemplating Artha's lessons on how to hold onto tactical thought while in the grips of rage. It boiled down to being able to control the target of your rage, being mad at the right thing instead of everything. The meal was good as usual, chunks of roasted meat with dark grain, spiced with herbs that tasted a lot like rosemary. But the heirs sat around the table quietly and ate their food without conversation. There was a faintly funerary air in the dining hall. Nathan didn't like it at all. But if he started speaking loudly about unrelated topics, it would only highlight the dour mood. So better to be productive. Hey, let's go over our formation and doctrine tomorrow. Jalba talked about good positioning and target prioritization, but we should figure it out for ourselves. Yeah, Kachai shot Nathan an odd look. They discussed this topic before during their practice sessions in the private arena. Nathan responded by flicking his eyes and rolling his head in a circle to indicate all of the other trainees in the room. We're supposed to be examples of what Gemor adventurers should be. So let's be examples. Kachai adopted a pensive expression, then raised his head and looked around the table. Yes, this is a good topic to speak on. My mother had some advice on this. We have two powerful range strikers, but they lack mobility. She suggested a diamond formation, with Nathan at the front, Sarah at the rear, and Stella in the center. Arl and I take the sides, where we can react quickly towards threats coming from all sides. Sarah is responsible for keeping an eye on the rear, but to all accounts and purposes, Nathan has the best perception skills of any of us. Is this acceptable? The other members of the team nodded, looking thoughtful but not offering any insights. For the sake of conversation, Nathan asked, why not a simple line formation? Melee fighters at the front and rear, Sarah and Stella in the middle, Arl answered, warming to the topic. The diamond gives us room to maneuver. If somebody is attacked by surprise, then they have room to retreat. Additionally, it allows us to most easily form a fighting line facing any direction, especially the front, without anybody running into anybody else. Clearer sight lines. We're also less likely to all be caught in a single trap or area effect. To reach Stella, an attacker would need to go through one of us, and it's least likely to be Sarah given our direction of movement. Lots of reasons to take that shape. Nathan nodded, surprised by none of this. As he looked around the still quiet dining hall, it was clear that most of the other trainees were listening in. Sounds good, but we should plan on those contingencies. It sounds like our overall strategy is to rely on Sarah and Stella to attack from range, and the rest of us should defend them and deal with anything that gets too close. Or are us melee folks planning to be more offensive? Kachai shrugged. It depends on the threat and what approach is best suited to dealing with it. We're lucky we have a lot of ways to deal with enemies, between Stella's magic, my hammer, and the Caxal twins' flexibility. Stanel's famous for always having the right weapon for the job, and with two miniature versions of him, we can approximate that. Sarah punched Katja in the shoulder as Stella stole his dessert, but the mood was broken. They sat and chatted about the various monsters they might face. The process of talking about it had renewed their confidence. They knew what was waiting for them tomorrow, and they knew how to deal with it. The mood carried into their suite after dinner, where the team sat around the table in the common room, talking more specifically about their responses to various threats. Nathan was a little frustrated since his role mostly boiled down to use notice to spot enemies, then hold the line with his spear. It didn't seem like his skill set was very helpful in most situations they expected to run into, especially given how many of them were easily solved by Stella hitting the threat with a fireball. She was quite pleased with that. I mean, yeah, judicious application of explosions solves a lot of problems. As it was getting late, Nathan asked one more question. What if Giant's Rest tries to ambush us while we're out on patrol? That brought the mood down again. Sarah answered slowly. It's possible, but unlikely. Old Gemore is big, and nobody knew where or when our patrol was going until today, and even then it's only approximate. The ruins are our territory, not theirs, and Giant's Rest doesn't know the dangers very well. If your Archmage decides to come for us, well, I wouldn't be surprised if our parents were on the lookout for that. I know there are ways to detect teleport spells. They're not supposed to watch over us directly because Davrar won't award levels if you're never in any danger, but I expect there are preparations we don't know about, and won't know about unless they're needed. And what else can they do? We're supposed to be adventurers, not children who need babysitters. There was nothing much more to say, so they went to bed quite early. Nathan felt like it was the night before a big test, which it was, in a sense, just with higher stakes than any test he'd ever taken. I dunno, some of those big standardized tests had pretty high stakes. I can't imagine how my life on Earth would have gone if I'd flunked the SAT. So Nathan did what he'd learned to do to calm down. He meditated, not with any specific goals in mind, just focusing on how he felt. He was anxious, unsurprisingly. Somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes later, Nathan was relaxed instead of anxious. He opened his eyes and had a realization that brought back most of the anxiety. Shit. I might lose my disadvantaged status from Davrar tomorrow. If we fight, and I level up past 27, there's a good chance. Okay. Did I have any ideas for specific skills and talents I want to get, that I can get in one night? Nathan thought about it for a minute. He didn't have any great ideas for talents. He'd been meaning to spend more time considering it, but his days had been busy. He didn't want to gamble on a talent that might end up permanent. He had more ideas for skills, but he was starting to get close to the cap, and a lot of his skill ideas would be great for his old life. But Davrar really didn't have much in the way of pipettes or culture hoods. He needed skills that would be useful here, and utility skills were rarely directly useful for combat, so he almost certainly couldn't just practice old martial arts forms and hope it gave him a skill. Put like that, there was one skill that Nathan had never doubted he'd try to pick up. However, he first brought up and rejected the reading skill. His reasoning was fairly simple. He could do a fine job without it, and he didn't want to risk having a pending skill preventing further skills from being unlocked. He needed to be capable of reading, but he didn't need to excel at it. He did need a skill to improve his memory, to help him remember technical details from Earth. It was time to figure that out. Luckily, Nathan had some knowledge and experience from Earth to help him with acquiring a memory skill. He'd read about memory techniques a few times, first when he tried to memorize the first 100 digits of pi in middle school, and then later when he was thinking about applying to medical school. After watching Sherlock in the first year of graduate school, he'd used a mind palace to help him retain facts for his qualifying exams. He hadn't used the technique a lot since then. He'd had all these grand plans to learn everything there was to know in his field and use his mind palace to remember it all. But then he'd gotten busy and hadn't had the time or energy to make it happen. But he remembered the basic shape of the palace he'd built. Nathan closed his eyes and focused, imagining the familiar structure. He always started at the back door of his childhood home. Inside the home, he'd put biology knowledge. The yard outside held everything else. He'd always liked the irony to that. The living room with comfortable couches held the basics of biochemistry. The big love seat represented the central dogma, and each pillow stood for a process in converting genetic code to protein. The world map on the wall was covered with the flashcards he'd used to learn the amino acids, laid over various landmasses. The bookcase was full, but only 4 books were important. Each one held the core chemical structures and common variations of the 4 primary classes of biomolecules. The TV cabinet was associated with central carbon metabolism, with each process of glycolysis as a separate VCR tape. On top was the Lion King, representing good old hexokinase, turning glucose into G6P. The citric acid cycle was represented by the DVDs stored on the next shelf down. Nathan breathed through his nose, surprised at how well it all came back to him. This part of the house was easy. This was all bedrock knowledge he'd remember even if he didn't have the mind palace. He left the living room, walking past the kitchen where all of the chemistry relevant to biology was. Then there was his dad's office, where he'd put microbiology. His bedroom had eukaryotic cell biology, long a favorite topic, and the associated bathroom was bacterial cell biology. Fitting. But again, that wasn't pushing the limits. He went upstairs to the computer room. This was where he'd put the eukaryotic transcriptional regulation knowledge. He'd gotten used to looking up the transcriptional regulatory networks instead of trying to remember them. But for his qualifying exam, he'd memorized as many as he could because one of his committee members had been infamous for grilling people over minutiae. It was hard and took effort and focus. Nathan first recalled the hours he'd spent playing StarCraft in this room when he was young. He remembered the shape, the way the tables were piled with boxes of hardware, disk cases, and scattered books, the slightly musty smell of the old carpet. But he couldn't remember the details he'd assigned to all of them. Start with the big things, the obvious things. The chair in front of the computer was mTOR. That one was easy. The things on the tables around it interacted with it. That book on the Colorado watershed was ATK, or protein kinase B, which he knew interacted with mTOR because the book was right next to the table. It encouraged cell proliferation and tended to be involved in cancer. He knew that without the mental construct, but then he saw the bookmarks in the book. In real life, each of those had marked a river that Nathan's dad enjoyed kayaking. Here, they stood for important details about how ATK worked. The first one had something to do with fats. Lipids. Nathan continued to fill in half-remembered details based on his memory of the room. He'd stuck details about epigenetics and chromatin packing into the pile of magazines in the corner, which he used to leaf through while waiting for matchmaking. Most of the details were things he was sure he couldn't recall without the memory construct. Nathan proceeded like this for some time. It felt like hours passed as he explored every corner of the room before mentally returning downstairs and heading outside. He remembered the yard in detail, but hadn't attached many memories to it. When he was experimenting with the Mind Palace, Nathan had associated the plots of some of his favorite books with the garden, but it hadn't gone very well. There was a bit of math knowledge in the treehouse, and he spent some time going over the linear algebra and multivariable calculus that he'd studied in undergrad, trying to associate it with the treehouse. He wanted his skill to help him recall past knowledge, not just remember things he already knew. With a sigh, Nathan opened his eyes, hoping for a blue box. He was rewarded. Pending utility skill. Mid-tier enhanced memory. You have created a detailed mental construct to aid with memory. This skill will help you store and recall memories quickly. Only provides fast recall for memories gained after gaining this skill, or memories stored in your mental construct. With time and effort, you can recall older memories and store them in the mental construct. I could certainly hope for more, but it'll do. Mid-tier 2. Thanks Davrar. Congratulations, you have accepted the mid-tier enhanced memory utility skill. With that, Nathan looked around his room. All was set and ready for bed, but now he was excited about the new skill. He should sleep, but first he wanted to try and see what he could recall. It was time for all that late-night, curiosity-driven Wikipedia browsing to pay off. As a first experimental topic, Nathan decided to see what he could remember of gun design. Nathan had never mucked about with gunsmithing, but he'd taken classes on the Meiji Restoration and the American Civil War and become interested in gun design off that. He'd also read about the history of the Old West revolvers and had scanned across a few design schematics and YouTube videos of how revolvers, lever-action and bolt-action rifles worked. It was fascinating to track the development of gun design over time, since it was almost an evolutionary process. Successful ideas would take over the industry, and then variations would be created until a new, optimal design was found. Nathan didn't know if he wanted to make a gun, and he certainly didn't have the metalworking expertise to do it on his own. But it was hard to imagine how his actual expertise in human cell biology could be applied here beyond regeneration. He could grow cells in a flask and do some pretty cool things with them, but he'd noticed a distinct lack of flasks, media, and incubators around here. By contrast, Nathan had been surprised at the tools and quality of metalwork that Vihala's cousin Beatrid had. It hadn't been a modern machine shop, but it was a lot closer to it than Nathan had expected to see in a world like this. And alchemy was an established field, though it seemed to focus on magical elixirs more than anything else. Nathan decided it was time to make a new mind palace to store his recalled memories. He liked what he'd built in his childhood home, but it seemed like a relic of his life on Earth. He wouldn't be in a rush to forget it, but he also didn't want to fill all of the available space with technical knowledge for use on Davrar. That would require a new mind palace. What would be a good setting? It didn't need to be a physical place, though it was definitely the easiest. A place that you knew well was ideal, with a lot of unique objects you could use as prompts for various pieces of knowledge. A map from a video game, maybe the world map of one of the Horizon games. After a moment of thought, Nathan smiled. He knew exactly what he'd tie his new mind palace to. He'd spent more time in the lab in the past 4 years than doing anything else and could remember the location of hundreds of reagents, pipettes, and consumables. Time to tie some facts to those. Mid-tier enhanced memory 2 achieved. Sometime later, Nathan finally slept. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com, Chapter 29. A blooding patrol. Nathan kicked himself the next morning for staying up late. He'd been sleeping well recently, but staying up late last night to recall firearms knowledge had made it harder than usual to wake up. Whoops. Well, he'd made some good progress, remembering details of the process for manufacturing black powder, as well as several compositions for primers and the basics of cartridge and gun design. If he actually wanted to follow through on this plan, then he'd be at the mercy of local craftspeople. However, knowing a few different methods would help him work through the problem with somebody else. Anyway, it's time to get going. He joined the rest of the heirs in the main room where they were eating a quick breakfast. Everybody else was nervous, Kachai fidgeting while Arl obsessively checked his various weapons. Stella conjured little bursts of fire as if to remind herself she could still do it, while Sarah stared at her breakfast as if it was her mortal enemy. Her spoon was sticking straight up out of the porridge. Nathan plopped down and gathered some of the breakfast pastries and porridge. He started ladling syrup into it, grinning all the while. It didn't take long for somebody to notice. "Why the bright-faced Nathan? Did you get bitten by a cheerful snake last night?" Sarah asked him, affronted by his smiling face. "Something like that. I picked up another utility skill. It won't help today, but I hope it'll be great in the long term. Gonna keep quiet about it for now, though." The rest of the team didn't look particularly thrilled with his news, with Stella in particular giving him the stink eye. It didn't take long for Katja to slap his gauntleted hands together with a metallic clang. "It is time to go. We all know what is to be done." With that, he stood and walked toward the door. Nathan carefully stacked his plates on the tray to be picked up later, then followed, grabbing his spear from the rack next to the door. He reflected on his general lack of equipment compared to the other heirs. They all had gear and preparations galore. Kachai was a brown-haired wolfman in full plate, with dimensional pouches affixed in various places containing different tools. He carried his hammer and shield, and looked like he could bulldoze through a herd of cows and smash a brick wall at the other end. His divine blessings were hinted at in the shininess of his armor. The metal always seemed to catch the light and glow dazzlingly. Stella was such a fantasy mage cliché that Nathan would have made jokes about it if anyone would have understood them. She wore the same green robe as when Nathan had first met her, the one with pockets of holding and magical protections. Her hair was done in the same long braid, which was tucked down the back of the robe. She was carrying her staff, even if she was in the habit of shoving it into a pocket in her sleeve when she didn't need the extra firepower it provided. Arl was decked in a flexible leather armor with metal plates inlaid at various points. He had solid steel vambraces and greaves, and Nathan knew the pouch on his belt was a veritable armory of melee weaponry. He had a gymnast's build, and his short dark hair matched his eyes and sculpted eyebrows. Sarah shared her brother's build and intensity, though she was a touch taller. Her armor was similar as well, though it was lighter and without the reinforced vambraces and greaves. Her pouch was identical to Arl's, but contained a wide variety of ranged weapons instead. Her hair was longer than her brother's and was gathered up into a high ponytail to keep it from catching on anything. Nathan reflected on his relationship with the heirs. They were new friends, but they were definitely friends. He'd trust them to have his back, all for different reasons. Kachai's stubborn pride wouldn't let him fail a teammate. Stella liked Nathan, and despite her pranks she was loyal to her friends. Arl was not as boisterous as Kachai, but he wanted to be a great adventurer and follow in his father's footsteps. To his mind, great adventurers kept their team alive. Sarah was the quietest member of the team, but she'd struck Nathan as the most inherently decent of them. She'd risk her life to save anybody, teammate or not. He didn't have too many regrets about joining the heirs. Regardless of the protection he got from being around them, he enjoyed their company. Maybe he wouldn't be able to be part of their team forever, but he could see himself in a few decades, sitting around a table with the heirs and looking back on many successful adventures. The image conflicted with his previously stated goal of burning Giant's Rest to the ground. But he'd gained some distance from the events that had sparked his hatred. Did it still burn as hot? As Nathan followed the heirs out of the building, he considered that. He remembered Tial's adamant belief that he owned Nathan and all of his knowledge. He remembered the lines of slaves trudging along and the people he'd met after they were freed. The flame of his fury flared once more, and Nathan clenched his fists. He was a member of the heirs, and he would protect and help them. But his mission was the destruction of Giant's Rest, and that hadn't changed. He'd spent some time learning about Davrar, gaining a home base, a team, a plan to level up. But when his level was higher and the time was right, he would go with Valhalla and dismantle Giant's Rest. As they left the Adventurers Guild and headed toward the city gate, Nathan snorted and shook his head. None of his musings changed the current situation. The other heirs looked back at Nathan and he waved a hand. It's easy to get stuck in your own head heading out like this. Anybody know some jokes? Sarah straightened her shoulders. What can't read makes inappropriate noises and isn't dressed for the current affair? Nathan shrugged. Sounds like me. I would like to say that I'm following Arthur's advice to not wear armor. I was going to say a goat, but if you think that describes you, go for it. Nathan frowned, but Katja and Arl chuckled. Nathan retaliated. I spy with my little eye something so shiny that everybody will see us from a mile away. Anybody want to guess what it is? Katja looked down at his gleaming armor. I am not given a choice about my level of shine. Stella kicked him while he was down. Well, you got to make the choice once, and you chose to be as shiny as possible, but we don't rely on stealth like those illusionists tower people. And good thing too, or else I'd have to think twice before throwing a fireball. And that's not my favorite thing to do. Arl and Sarah traded a look, then chorused together. We noticed. They continued in that vein down to the gate, which was just opening as the sun blossomed overhead. The city was bathed in light, and Nathan turned to take one last look up the hill. Gemor was a pretty city, though by Earth standards it was barely a town. The gate guards waved them through respectfully, a few dipping their heads in faint bows, and with that they were out of the city. They took the northern road out of the great plaza. Nathan was tentative about stepping onto the magical transit road, but he didn't feel any mana when he stepped into the space distortion effect, and his stamina didn't tick up. There definitely weren't magical glyphs exposed on the surface. Maybe underneath it. Maybe it was a city-wide enchantment buried deep underground. Regardless, his talent didn't mess with the effect. That suggests there's definitely still magic that can hurt me. It's just way beyond anything I've seen living people practicing. He kept an eye peeled for stalkers or other people on the road, but there was nothing. Just Nathan and the heir striding at incredible speed through an enormous ruined city. The northern portion of the city contained fairly intact ruins, without many of the collapsed buildings or extensive swaths of greenery that were common throughout the rest of the city. They didn't have to go too far to find the landmark for their patrol. It was a small city square offset to one side of the road. Part of it was composed of an overgrown park. The other side was dominated by a ruined, cathedral-like structure. One of the spires had fallen on the vaulted roof, crushing it, but the other stood like a spike of rusted metal thrust into the sky. Our first step is making sure the old community center and green space is cleared, then we fan out from there. Katja wasn't saying anything they didn't already know, but the heirs stepped off the road and fell into their diamond formation. Nathan was in front because he could see through magical stealth and had notice, focused mind, and identify. So he put them to work, scanning the buildings. He stopped a few times to activate focused mind in order to discern more details, but nothing moved, aside from a faint breeze stirring the foliage. They made for the cathedral-like building first. It was the sort of space that various creatures like to hide in, and with the proximity to the road that was unacceptable. After a careful check, they were pretty sure that nothing had lived there in some time. They also climbed halfway up the spire since airborne monsters had been known to nest in it. It gave a good view over the surrounding area, which appeared to mostly be a wilderness of 6 to 7-story residential and commercial buildings. Most were ruined or scarred in some way. Nathan looked over the view and shivered. The sun was shining, and the greenery rippled peacefully, but it looked a lot like post-apocalyptic cities he'd seen in Earth fiction. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in, then out. He opened his eyes and scanned again. This time, he saw something. About 5 blocks away, something moved inside a building whose shadows seemed just a little too deep. Nathan added some kind of spyglass or binoculars to his wish list and shaded his eyes to look closer, searching for the feeling he'd noticed when piercing the Earth Stalker's stealth. He felt it, like tiny threads of magic interfering with his vision. Nathan pointed at the building. Stalkers, Earth, I think, that building with the collapsed roof. Sarah, who was also scanning the horizon, squinted at the building. I can't see them, she shook her head. But I wouldn't. Let's go check it out. I bet I could hit them from here, Stella put in, standing at the edge and coyly looking over her shoulder at the rest of the team. Her smirk belied the statement as a half-joke. And then any survivors would scatter and lay ambushes every chance they'd get, Kachai rumbled, his lips turned down in a frown. It will be cleaner to take them on where we expect them, and not have them trying to pick us off all day. Arl clapped Kachai on the shoulder. And will be more useful than nipples on a breastplate. They descended the tower, making for the building where Nathan had spotted the stalkers. A block away they started moving more quietly and angled their formation towards their supposed targets. Nathan was focused on the building, watching every doorway and broken window. It looked like the bottom floor had been a series of shops, with residential housing above. The upper floors were complete with large windows, none of which had more than a few stray shards of glass remaining. They'd gotten relatively close when Nathan spotted the Earth Stalkers taking positions in the windows above them, relying on their magic to hide themselves. The six-legged creatures moved smoothly, their brown scales blending into the stone of the building. Most of them stood at about 4 feet, and their third eye glowed above a snout bristling with fangs. Nathan spoke low but clearly. We've been spotted. Earth Stalkers waiting to leap. Kachai replied in a tense whisper. Stella, shield above us on Nathan's word. Prevent any from landing on us. Sarah, don't let any get behind us. Weapons ready but down, we want to draw them in. The team continued walking forward, pivoting to stay pointed at the stalker-infested building. Nathan checked out the other buildings quickly but didn't see any trace of stalkers having snuck around them. They reached the front of the building, and Nathan could see some stalkers trembling, resisting the urge to leap. There was a faint rumbling hiss, and all of the stalkers tensed as one. He yelled, "Shield now," and brought up his spear. Nathan was moments from a life-or-death fight, and the realization thrilled through him like a roller coaster drop. Low-tier notice rank 9 achieved. The stalkers leapt as a single unit, aiming to land among and around the party. A conical blue shield appeared overhead, sharpening to a point. The Earth Stalker that had aimed to land on Stella in the middle of their formation was impaled, and the others that had aimed for each party member deflected off the shield. One caught a spinning axe to the face as it fell. Another landed in a tangle in front of Nathan, and he burned stamina as he leaped forward to stab it in the underbelly with his spear. He'd taken a moment to judge where its ribs were, and jabbed the spear between two of them high on its chest. The stalker convulsed at the blow, and Nathan continued to spend stamina to tear the spear up and twist it, enlarging the wound as much as he could before freeing the weapon. The orange spearhead had cut through the underbelly scales like butter and sliced a wide path through the creature's body on the way out. However, Nathan didn't have time to evaluate the state of that stalker, as another swarmed past it to attack him. He flicked his spear towards it, and the monster halted as suddenly as it had appeared. Nathan stepped forward to spear it, but another stalker leapt over the creature that Nathan had stabbed and flanked him. He skittered to the side to dodge a quick snap of jaws but had to retreat in the face of the two reptilian foes. They coordinated their attacks, and it was all he could do to ward them off with rapid jerks of his spear. He was using stamina to be as fast as possible, but they were nearly as quick. A third came from the left, and Nathan had to dodge another biting jaw. Low-tier dodging footwork rank 6 achieved. Nathan bared his own teeth as he faced down the 3 Earth Stalkers. He should feel terrified, confronted by a group of foes he could not take on his own. But instead, Nathan felt like he was bursting with energy. He stepped forward to charge them, mouth opening in a roar. Then he heard the sweetest of sounds. Danger close. Nathan continued his sprinting advance, knowing what would follow. A fireball flew past him, impacting the middle stalker. The magic blew the creature in half and showered the area with fire and gore. The other two staggered from the explosion. Nathan planted his spear through the neck of the one on the right, cutting deep and feeling the blade hit the spine and break bone. The stalker went limp, but his spear was stuck. Nathan spun to the left, looking for the other stalker. It was badly burnt and very upset. It skittered at him with a limping gait, favoring the limbs not charred by the fireball. My priority is not letting it get to my head or chest. Nathan braced himself and put his hands up as if he meant to stop the charging beast. Even with his height and the added muscle of the last weeks, it outmassed him at least 2-1. At the last moment, he juked to the side. The stalker whipped its head at him, and Nathan punched it in the snout, deflecting a bite and cracking the creature's head to the side. At that moment, a 3-foot spike of rock shot toward him, zipping out of the shadows of the building. Nathan tried to dodge, but he was committed to his juke and it hit him in the side. There was definitely magic involved, since the rock that should have speared through his kidney just tore his clothes and dug a gouge in his skin as it disintegrated to dust. Nathan felt the tang of earth mana in the rock as the magic flowed into him, refilling his stamina. In response to the magical attack, Kacha yelled out a warning to the rest of the heirs. "We've got a patriarch. Watch for conjured earth spikes and quicksand." Then he grunted, the sound of his hammer hitting pavement betraying the wolfman's own battle. Nathan directed his attention to his side, feeling very indifferent to the pain. The stalker that had charged him punished him for the distraction, lashing out with its talons and weakly clawing into his thigh. Nathan staggered back, narrowly avoiding going to one knee. A thrown javelin from Sarah sank into the stalker's middle eye, and it spasmed before slumping to the ground. Nathan looked toward the entrance to the building, seeing a hulking creature lurking beyond. Its eye glowed a rich brown, much brighter than any of the other stalkers. Nathan started working his spear back and forth from the neck of the dead monster. Another spike of earth lanced towards his head, but he'd been expecting it and jerked himself sideways with the spear, which came loose a moment later. Low-tier dodging footwork rank 7 achieved. The patriarch let loose a rumbling hiss and turned to flee. Nathan glanced to the sides and saw Arl and Kacha each dueling a stalker. They didn't seem to need help, so he sprinted after the fleeing patriarch. As he did, he felt a joyful wrath surge within him. "You run from me, you cowardly lizard." The thought was followed by a flash of self-reflection. Running into this building might be stupid, the sort of risk that could get him killed. But his regeneration made it much harder for him to die. His allies were close and could assist him soon, and the patriarch was fleeing. If it got away, they'd have to hunt it anyway. Landing a wound or depleting its mana would make that hunt much more likely to succeed. And to walk the path of rage, Nathan needed to follow his anger, and his anger was telling him to wring its neck. Low-tier sprinting rank 9 achieved. The moment Nathan crossed into the large entryway beyond the door, the extra-large stalker spun to face him. The spear in his hand seemed small as the creature loomed over him, its third eye glowing brightly enough to light up the room. The floor started to soften, stone blocks giving way to slick sand, except around Nathan's feet, where the stonework persisted. He smirked and ran forward. His foot sunk into the sand with each new step, but not far. Nathan spared half of his attention to drawing in the earth mana directly underneath his foot, and the loose sand solidified under his feet. Nathan used a burst of stamina to push hard off the resolidified surface as he yelled out the magic words. "Danger close!" He stabbed at the stalker's face, but it twisted to take the blow on the shoulder. His spearhead cut through skin but deflected from bone, leaving a deep but ultimately superficial cut. The creature turned back towards him, fangs bared. Nathan tried to push the snout away with his left hand, but its jaws slammed shut on his upper arm, cracking bone and leaving his left arm almost entirely inside the stalker's mouth. Oh, not again. Instead of tearing his arm the rest of the way off, the patriarch was blown backwards by one of Stella's fireballs, releasing Nathan's mangled arm as it screamed. Nathan's stamina once again climbed to full from the proximity of the blast, and he leapt forward to stab at the stalker's head with his spear. The creature shied away, feet scrabbling to dodge Nathan's one-handed thrusts. Only half of its legs seemed to be functional after the fireball. It was enough. Nathan disengaged, stepping back from the stalker and retreating to the corner of the room. It couldn't escape anymore, and he didn't need to be the one to kill it. Nathan focused on healing his arm, dropping his spear to grab his left arm with his right. He manually lined up the bones. Then he regenerated the punctures from the stalker's teeth, careful to start from the bottom of the wound to avoid trapping any debris under his skin. Lucky for him, stalkers, even patriarchs, didn't have venom. He kept an eye on the stalker and watched Kachai run into the room. The wolfman was standing on a horizontal plane of 4 inches above the quicksand. His armor flashed, blinding light shooting in every direction. Nathan merely blinked away faint spots in his vision, but the stalker patriarch screamed, its head jerking away. Kachai brought his hammer down on the monster's head, crushing it to the stone floor outside the radius of the quicksand. There was a second of silence, and it seemed the fight was done. "We're done. Got them all." Nathan's voice was harsher than he meant it to be, but Kachai didn't take it amiss. He gestured them outside, and Nathan followed Kachai out the door into the bloodied street. Nathan was splashed with blood, some of it his own. His shirt was ripped and bloody, and his pants had a few tears. Kachai's hammer was covered in blood, and he had spatters covering much of his armor. As Nathan watched, they started to dry up and flake away. Arl was carrying his favored greatsword, the upper half of which was crimson. He'd been sprayed with blood. His arm was especially bloody, and it looked like something had taken a finger-sized chunk from his upper arm. Kachai hustled over and muttered a prayer. Golden light emanated from his hands as he grasped Arl's arm. It healed over in moments. Stella and Sarah were a short distance away. They hadn't moved far from where they'd started the fight, and both seemed uninjured. After a moment where all the heirs looked at each other and ensured everybody was in one piece, they all broke into grins. Nathan raised his arms to the sky. "Woohoo! You have leveled up to level 27. Congratulations, you have slaughtered a nest of deadly monsters and personally killed some. Please choose a developed class from the following list to continue leveling, as you have unlocked a level higher than 27. Nice." Chapter 30 Discoveries. Still shaking from adrenaline after the fight, Nathan looked over his new class choices. Oh man, this is exciting. Potential classes. Magic Suppressor. You are adept at suppressing magical effects and countering spells actively cast on you. This class will enhance your anti-magic capabilities, granting skills and modifying existing skills to enhance anti-magic range, speed, and allowing you to actively drain mana. It may further develop into classes focused on stealing control of magical spells, breaking permanent magical effects, or denying magic in a wide area. This class will weaken your physical combat abilities. Magebane Berserker. You have bent your anger to empower your offensive martial ability. This class will enhance your physical strength and mage-killing prowess on the battlefield, granting skills and modifying existing skills to enable raging, where stamina will be spent to become significantly tougher, stronger, and faster. Additional skills will enhance your base strength, as well as lethality to mages while in rage. This may further develop into classes focused on extending and enhancing your rage, adding extra effects to your rage, or transforming into a different form while raging. Anti-Magic Boxer. You have become adept at using your fists to fight magical opponents. This class will enhance your hand-to-hand fighting ability, granting skills and modifying existing skills to improve the power and accuracy of your hand-to-hand blows, while increasing your overall stamina pool. It may further develop into classes focused on disabling enemies with hand-to-hand strikes, or broadening your focus to other forms of unarmed combat. Anti-Magic Fighter. You have learned to use weapons effectively to fight magical opponents. This class will enhance your ability to fight in melee, granting skills and modifying existing skills to aid in learning various weapons, as well as improving your striking power and armor-penetrating capabilities. It may further develop into classes focused on specific weapons, or become a generalist class that can utilize many weapons. This class will weaken your anti-magic abilities. Spellbreaker Juggernaut. You have embraced your anger and thrill of battle, and used them for unrelenting assaults. This class will make you an unstoppable force, granting skills and modifying existing skills to enable raging, where stamina will be spent to become significantly tougher, stronger, and faster. Additional skills will enhance your durability, as well as your ability to disrupt spell effects, especially those aimed at hindering or slowing you. This class may further develop into classes focused on breaching fortified defenses, extending or enhancing your rage, or further enhancing your anti-magic capabilities while raging. Anti-Magic Scout. You are the member of your team responsible for detecting threats and warning others about them. This class will enhance your ability to scout out threats, granting skills and modifying existing skills to enhance movement, perception, and stealth. It may develop into classes focused on stealth, long-range observation, or assassination. Anti-Magic Monk. You have embraced meditation to help you develop martial combat skills to fight hand-to-hand against magic. This class will enhance your hand-to-hand fighting ability, granting skills and modifying existing skills to change your stamina into chi, which can be spent to allow various effects. Additional skills will improve your physical precision and control, as well as allow you to meditate to regain chi. This class may further develop into classes focused on achieving enlightenment through combat, protecting a specific place, or dedication towards an ideal. Nathan stood in the street of a ruined city, next to his friends and teammates. Surrounding them were the scattered corpses of more than a dozen Earthstalkers. Their blood painted the street red in a wide arc. The bodies were lean and predatory, with 6 heavily muscled legs and smooth scales of a dull brown. Nathan shivered as he looked over the landscape of the fight. He was coming down from the adrenaline high and thrill of battle, and he could retrace the flow of the flight from the bodies and their wounds. There was a clear spot where the heirs had first stood. It had been protected by Stella's shield. That oasis was surrounded by blood and gore. On Arl's side lay 5 dead stalkers, most still curled around the weapons that had ended them. One had gotten a spear through the mouth, another a large axe to the neck. The next was missing 2 limbs and had a slash through the stomach that spilled viscera all over the street. A heavy throwing axe from Sarah had split the skull of another, and a final stalker had been blown into pieces by a fireball. 2 of the bodies on Kachai's side had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head and chest, while another 4 had been killed with ranged weapons and magic. It also seemed that an additional 2 had tried to sneak around the back to get to Sarah, but one of them had a crossbow bolt sticking from its third eye, and the other looked to have been partially bisected by a blade of force. Bisected the long way. And then there was the one that Stella had gored on her force shield, which had fallen next to Nathan's kills after the shield had dissipated. Arl and Sarah went forward to retrieve their weapons, cleaning them off before returning them to the dimensional bags at their hips. Stella was clearly counting bodies in the same way Nathan was. Looks like 6 for me, 2 for Nathan, 3 for Arl, 2 for Kachai, and 4 for Sarah. I'd say that Kachai, Nathan, and I all got the patriarch. And that's why you keep the ranged people safe. We'll do all the heavy lifting. The short redhead flexed her bicep before twirling in place and giving an amused Sarah a high five. Their work wasn't done yet, and they spent a good portion of the next hour stacking the bodies on the edge of the street. The third eye of certain stalkers had some valuable magical properties, but they were hard to extract and preserve. The heirs weren't equipped for it. With a few exceptions, monster parts were usually harvested only by teams that specialized in doing so. Arl did grab the stalker canine teeth, which didn't have magically valuable properties but were a nice ivory and would serve as proof of the kills. The teeth from the patriarch would likely make a striking handle for a sword or weapon. After they'd stacked the dead monsters, Stella proceeded to use a spell specifically tailored for incinerating bodies. It was slow and not very focused, but it was mana efficient. Over the course of the next 5 minutes, the stalker bodies were reduced to a charred pile of melted fat and burnt muscle. Their goal wasn't to completely get rid of the bodies, but to prevent any of them from rising as undead or becoming a host for various parasites or diseases that liked fresh corpses. Nathan was glad they had a powerful mage on their team. Jalba had described other ways to deal with monster corpses after a fight, and they didn't sound pleasant. There were alchemical solutions that burned or dissolved flesh, but they were expensive. The more common approach was simply to hack apart the monster corpses, scattering the bits over a wide area. That seemed a bit. He glanced at his bloody spear and torn shirt and grimaced. "Stella, can I get a spare shirt from your bag of holding? Arl, could I ask you to clean off my spearhead?" "Sorry for the trouble, it's just that I've got this whole thing with magic. You know." Stella laughed and threw him a replacement shirt. Arl just sighed, and the sweaty copper-skinned man pulled out the set of cloths he'd just stowed away. "Carry on like this and you'll never learn how to maintain a weapon, but you owe me a favor. A few years of this and it might even be worth an insight. You seem to have no end of valuable ones." Nathan hummed, a little taken aback by how good Arl looked in that moment. A little sweaty, a bit exasperated. "You know, maybe we should talk later about trading insights. I've got a utility skill that I'm pretty sure makes it easier to figure out other insights. It's a bit of a pain to rank up, though." He was thinking of focused mind and also wondering if it would be helpful for mages and their spell casting. Kachai interrupted the conversation. "A good conversation to have. Later. For now, we must resume our patrol." With a nest of stalkers this large, it is unlikely that there is anything else threatening, but we must fulfill our job and much of the day remains. The party spent a few more minutes resting. Nathan chewed down some of his stored rations, mostly spicy jerky. He'd never been particularly low on stamina during the fight because of what he'd absorbed from Stella's spells, but it didn't hurt to top off. And he was hungry. While he chewed, he considered his new class options again. They were a lot less varied than the options he'd gotten the first time, but that made sense since they were all developments of Anti-Magic Brawler. Nathan was excited to talk to Arthur about his choices and speculate on what kinds of new skills he might get. He was also thinking of getting advice from his fellow heirs and maybe their parents. All of that would happen in safety, once they'd returned to Gemor proper. His initial thoughts were that both Magebane Berserker and Spellbreaker Juggernaut were on the path of rage. Arthur had been guiding him towards it, so he knew what he was getting into and had a mentor to help him figure out how to use them. Both were likely contenders. His gut pushed him towards Spellbreaker Juggernaut, though Nathan wasn't sure if that was just because the name sounded cooler. Meanwhile, Magic Suppressor went further into anti-magic in a way that appealed to Nathan. Being able to drain mana from people sounded pretty strong. An anti-magic monk could be really strong if Nathan could replicate magical effects with chi while keeping his hand-to-hand combat abilities. Was it a D&D style chi or cultivation style chi? Nathan didn't know, and he didn't think there was anybody he could ask. He also had to keep in mind that he probably wouldn't have a mentor to help him figure out how to use it. Regardless, Nathan wasn't going to make the decision immediately. Unless I gotta, of course. Let's hope I didn't just jinx it. But if I do need to choose in a pinch again, I like Spellbreaker Juggernaut best. It follows the path of rage and explicitly calls out the durability Artha was going for. Maybe something else is better, but this is sticking to the plan. They set off once again. There was a lot of ground to cover, and the mostly intact buildings meant that they had to walk down nearly every street. There was little chance of getting lost since they all paid attention to the landmarks they passed. Katja in particular seemed to have an excellent sense of direction. Nathan stayed on high alert, using notice and focused mind as before. Nothing stood out to him. The city was empty, and they were surrounded by buildings too ruined for anything but demolition. Nothing moved except the occasional bird or small prey animal. Chipmunks were the same no matter where you were. By lunchtime, they'd looped back to the square where the patrol began. The heirs made sure the green space was clear and sat down to have lunch. Stella was proud and a bit embarrassed since her parents had given her enough food for everybody and made her promise to share. The food was still trail food, preserved and prepared to be eaten without cutlery. But the quality was high, with a rich, savory pemmican and honeyed biscuits washed down by sweetened juices. Nathan made sure to be appreciative, and to make fun of Stella for being spoiled by her parents. It was all good-natured, Katja defended her, explaining his mother's idea of trail food. Apparently Kia thought unflavored jerky, ground oats and rainwater were perfectly suitable for days on end. After the brief break, they crossed the main road and scoped out the ruins on the other side. It was boring work. Once or twice they saw markings that looked like tracks, and they found a pile of large bones that could have belonged to a siege boar. But the bones were old, yellowed and jumbled together. The tusks were missing, which likely meant a party of adventurers had killed it or at least found the skeleton. Hours passed uneventfully, but Katja reminded them that there was still a good chance of danger. The heirs tried not to relax their guard. They'd patrolled in a wide arc away from the road, and the ruins had become more irregular. More of the buildings were collapsed, leaving rubble blocking some of the roads. After a little while, they found another large boulevard that they decided delineated the outer edge of their patrol responsibilities. It didn't mean they were done, but they would walk along it before sweeping back to cover another swath. Once they returned to the transit road, they'd be done. The boulevard was wide and spacious, with scattered islands of greenery breaking through the flagstones in places. It didn't have the space compression magic that increased travel speed, but had clearly been a major thoroughfare. Nathan was on the far right side of the street, looking at the buildings next to him as he led the way. They were all 5 or 6 stories tall, with some having partially collapsed. What do you think these buildings were? They don't look the same as the ones near the community center. Arl was directly behind Nathan and he answered, I don't know, but I don't think people lived in them, maybe where people worked. But I don't see shops or anything at the bottom, it's strange. Nathan turned around and saw the rest of the heirs looking up to the right, studying the buildings next to them. His notice twigged about something and Nathan was confused. There was nothing to see, the road was boring, nothing moved in the buildings and his party members were all present. But why are we in a line? We've been in formation all day. All of the heirs had their backs facing the center of the street, intently studying the buildings that Nathan had pointed out. A chill ran down Nathan's neck, and he determinedly spun to face the center of the boulevard. He called out, Arms up, spread out, something's funky. Nathan took a few steps forward, studying the street. The stone was smooth and even all the way across, the flagstones looking as if they'd just been laid. Nathan noticed that they weren't even dirty. That's weird, none of these streets have been so pristine. He raised his eyes, looking at the buildings opposite. They were completely normal, nothing unusual with them. Then Nathan took a deep breath and activated focused mind. The buildings were normal, but even with notice, Nathan couldn't see a single identifying detail about them. Literally nothing stood out. He looked away and realized he couldn't recall if the buildings had been tall or short, the shape of their windows, literally nothing. He searched his mind for invasive magic and felt an amazingly subtle vapor that burned away as he focused on it. Mid-tier focused mind rank 9 achieved. Low-tier notice rank 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to the next level. Nothing changed, except that Nathan found it easier to look towards the building's opposite. There'd been a subtle but powerful look-away effect there, maybe combined with something that made you unable to recall what you'd seen. And now that he was able to pick out details, he saw the too clean street wavering faintly as if hidden by a heat haze. Bet that's an illusion. Low-tier identify rank 6 achieved. Shit. Illusions. Nathan took a few steps forward, entering the area where the road was clean and feeling it out with his hands. If this was a giantress ambush, he needed to break their illusions as soon as possible so they could see their foe. His hand stopped, pushing against what felt like a brittle pane of glass. The scene flickered, and Nathan recalled the feeling of shadow mana he'd felt when practicing with William. This was like that, but much more complicated. The spellwork was made of more than shadow, with at least 2 other types of mana layered together. Light and something new. Something that felt like the softest touch of warm fabric. Dream mana. Nathan ripped with his hands, shredding the illusion and absorbing it into himself. A few things changed. The building across the way was revealed to be a squat, blocky thing about 30 feet tall. The windows were high up and barred, the walls around them made of enormous blocks of well-fitted stone. There was a metal door fit for a nuclear shelter sealing the entrance. Short bunkers flanked the building on both sides. Each one had a turret on top, which were aimed at the airs. A half-dozen floodlight-like constructs decorated the front of each bunker, also aimed in their direction. Even worse, the previously empty road was no longer empty. 8 spindly metal constructs had been slowly advancing across the road, but when Nathan broke the barrier, they shifted into a run. The street they charged across was dotted with corpses. Corpses in armor. The corpses of adventurers. Chapter 30, Repercussions. A lot of things happened very quickly. The turrets on top of the bunkers fired with a faint woof, and a projectile blurred in Nathan's direction. He dodged to the side, but it had been aimed at his center mass and was moving fast. The spike of metal impacted the right side of his chest and went through his entire body, snapping ribs and coring a lung before hitting the street behind him. Nathan spun and fell, struggling to breathe as blood bubbled from the wounds in his chest and back. Stella cried out in pain behind him. Nathan looked back for a second and saw her sprawled against a wall, another bolt sticking out of her chest. Kachai moved to cover her with his big shield, but Nathan was exposed, the constructs fast approaching. The sound of metal on stone grew louder, and Nathan pushed himself up. He grit his teeth and focused on the lung wound, burning stamina to heal his lungs before too much air escaped into his chest cavity. My regeneration needs to be faster. My lung will collapse at this rate, and I don't know if regeneration can fix that. He advanced towards the metal constructs as they skittered across the street. They were tall, with 4 thin metal legs holding a central body about 5 feet in the air. A tube-like head was fused to the top of the body, and they were all pointed towards Nathan. More concerning were the 2 arms protruding up from the central body, tipped with long cutting blades. Overall, they looked like bugs from the movie Starship Troopers, but in steel and chrome. That movie was good satire, but bad at engaging with Heinlein's original. Nathan shook the distraction aside and snarled as he ran forward. He could feel his lungs starting to operate again, his ribs reknitting. What the hell was going on here? The classes in the Adventurers Guild had never described whatever the fuck these foes were. Low-tier sprinting rank 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to the next level. As they closed in on him, the bug construct's head split open to reveal cannon-like barrels. Magic kindled, and varied spells began flying from the constructs. The barrels sparked with lightning that struck out at Nathan instantaneously. 2 more volleyed small bolts of fire at him like machine guns. Another 2 shot out blades of force, one at chest level and another at thigh level. The final 2 fired sprays of acid. Nathan didn't try to dodge any of it. His clothes were charred, sliced, and dissolved in an instant. One of the blades of force cut his spear shaft clean through, and the remaining pieces of wood started to bubble and liquefy under the acid. Nathan discarded the ruined weapon. That's really not how acid works. Magic. Nathan himself was relatively unharmed. He had light cuts from the blades of force, and the acid burned his eyes and made his skin itch. The lightning had barely registered and the fire was doing nothing. It took a bare moment's attention to heal the cuts and soothe the inflammation. Mid-tier regeneration rank 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this talent. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this talent to develop it to the next level. Nathan's stamina was completely filled by all the magic flying past, and he started feeling jittery, like he'd had too much caffeine. As he sprinted forward, he examined the spellwork coming his way. Everything cast on him had been a simple spell, but the simplicity wasn't the kind of basic working of mana that was easy to understand. It was the simplicity of something with no extraneous parts, a spell pruned for absolute efficiency. Each of the fire bolts that impacted Nathan were identical, elegant weaves. Nathan saw a truth of magic in that moment. Truly efficient spells used single strands of mana to fulfill multiple purposes at once. Congratulations, you have developed the low-tier spell sense, utility skill into mid-tier spell sense. Utility skill, mid-tier spell sense. This skill will help you identify mana types and spell weaves more easily. Helps you understand what individual elements of spells are accomplishing. Does not grant understanding of how to weave mana together for specific spells. Nathan broke through a cloud of acid to find that the bug constructs had reversed their direction. They maintained their distance from him, continuing to pepper him with spells from afar. Then the spotlight-like constructs arrayed on the front of the bunkers lit up. There were 12 of them in total, and 3 cast their beams on Nathan. The others focused beyond him on the airs. Nathan felt a pressure on his mind, not dissimilar to the sleep spell that Tial had cast on him. He brushed it off easily, furious at the attempted invasion of his mind. The bug constructs transitioned between different types of spells, trying to find a weakness in his defenses. Nathan was barraged by rays of freezing cold, spikes of ice, scorching beams of light, bolts of death mana, a variety of force workings, and conjured balls of stone. All they accomplished was to knock Nathan around a little bit and keep his stamina topped off. He spun around to see how the airs were doing. Magic absorption rank 2 achieved. They didn't seem to be doing well. Stella was still collapsed against the wall in a pool of blood. Nathan couldn't tell if Katja had healed her, since the wolfman was hunkered in front of her with his shield. Several bolts were stuck through the shield, and Nathan saw red dripping to the cobbles from Katja's kneeling form. Arl and Sarah were dazed, gazing dreamily at the spotlights illuminating them. As he watched, Sarah shook herself and leapt high into the air while loosing a glowing arrow at the beam emitters. The arrow sped through the air before exploding against a previously invisible magical shield that protected the bunker. The beams refocused on Sarah in midair and she froze. She'd been aiming for a window on the second story of the building. Instead of a smooth landing, She cracked her legs against the windowsill and fell to the street with a crunch. Fuck. Those beams need to go down now. And I think I'm the only one for the job. Nathan spun again, facing the squat building with its deadly bunkers and construct guardians. The metal bugs had stopped firing spells at him. Nathan raged at the way the ambush had played out so far. The heirs were completely disabled, and he'd failed to deal with the bug constructs. He leaned forward to sprint towards the bunkers, lips curling back. The bug constructs hurried to interpose themselves, and Nathan regarded their cutting arms cautiously. He slowed as he approached the first two, trying to juke around them. One of them lunged forward as if fired from a cannon, and Nathan dodged to the side but failed to get far enough away to avoid the blow. He threw his right arm up to block, and the cutting arm went right through his wrist and sliced across his chest. Blood spurted out, and Nathan had to dodge low and skip backwards as another swept a blade for his neck. Low-tier dodging footwork rank 7 achieved. Nathan backpedaled and considered fleeing. These constructs were beyond him. This entire fight was beyond them. That blow aimed at his neck would have killed him instantly, but he could make it if he just ran away. It would mean leaving the heirs behind, but Nathan valued his life more than theirs. A few weeks of growing friendship hadn't changed that. The bug constructs formed up into a half-circle facing Nathan. They advanced slowly to push him back, no longer firing spells. Nathan looked to the side. If he just took off down the street, he would be able to get away. Stuck in indecision, Nathan turned his frustration inwards, specifically to his injuries. His regeneration was too slow and it required too much attention. He shouldn't have to direct his stamina. His every cell had his body's blueprint in their DNA through encoded hormone gradients. They could all divide and differentiate appropriately to heal without requiring his attention. Congratulations, you have developed the mid-tier regeneration talent into high-tier regeneration. Talent, high-tier regeneration. This talent will automatically spend stamina to very rapidly heal wounds. Larger wounds and replacing greater amounts of missing flesh will take longer and cost more stamina. Regeneration will not prevent you from dying to grievous wounds and will not protect against poison. What made him reconsider fleeing wasn't the talent development or the thought of possible vengeance inflicted by Kia, Dalo, or Stanel. It was imagining Cull's reaction to being told her daughter was dead. He could easily imagine her face crumple and her frame shake. He heard Jalba's resigned sigh as yet more of his students went to an early grave. Nathan had a chance here. He could make powerful allies, gain a home base that was safe from Giant's Rest. If the heirs died here, he probably wouldn't be welcome in Gemor anymore. And it so happened that Nathan had another card to play. Congratulations, you are now a Spellbreaker Juggernaut. 2 of your existing class skills have developed, and you have unlocked 3 new class skills. These skills are tied to your parent class, and their power will increase with your level in that class. Davrar applauds your choice and hopes you will continue to survive and prosper. Class skill stamina remains unchanged. Stamina will accumulate during periods of rest and can be spent to improve the speed and strength of your movements, or used for other skills or talents that utilize stamina. Class skill Brawler's Indifference has become Juggernaut's Wrath. You will be unflinching in the face of pain and injury, and serious wounds will enhance the intensity of your rage. This skill will trigger your rage without your consent if you are badly injured. Class skill Anti-Magic Blows has become Anti-Magic Momentum. Motion enhances your inherent anti-magic, allowing you to break magical effects with your movements and blows. The greater the momentum behind the motion, the greater the enhancement. Effect is further enhanced while raging. New class skill Raging Thrill. You can voluntarily enter and exit a rage state where you will be immersed in the thrill of combat. This will rapidly consume stamina but will increase your strength, speed, and resilience to damage. New class skill Juggernaut's Inertia. Your motions carry greater momentum, and it will be harder to stop or slow you, especially with magical effects. New class skill Unarmored Resilience. When not wearing armor, your body becomes more resilient to damage from all sources. Now that you have developed your class, you will level up to the correct level. You have leveled up to level 32.